You are watching a cooking show you have no intention of following when your wife sits down across from you at the kitchen table with the folder. You know the folder. It is manila, and it lives in the second drawer of the filing cabinet in the hallway. And when it comes out, it means the conversation you have been mutually postponing has arrived anyway, the way things do when you keep declining to look at them. She opens it. She does not say anything dramatic. She simply arranges three pieces of paper in front of you: the mortgage statement, the car payment, the credit card, and sits back with the expression of a person who loves you and is also exhausted by the current situation and does not know how to hold both of those things at once. The numbers on the papers are not a surprise. You have been carrying them in your head for weeks with the particular weight of things you know but haven't spoken. The restaurant where you'd worked as a line cook for 6 years closed in March. You've been picking up shifts at a catering company since then. Intermittent work, enough to keep moving, but not enough to keep still. You say, okay. She says she's not trying to pressure you. You say, I know. You both look at the papers for a moment. You say you'll figure something out. She says she knows you will. The cooking show is still going in the other room, someone enthusiastically deglazing a pan, and the mundanity of it against the weight of the table feels almost funny, and you almost laugh, but don't, because that would require explaining, and explaining would take energy you'd rather direct toward the problem. The transit authority posting appears 2 days later. On a job board you check every morning now with the grim regularity of checking the weather in a city you can't leave. Bus operator. Class B, CDL required or willingness to obtain through company training program. Starting wage $19.40, hour, union position, full benefits after 60 days, pension after 5 years. You read it 3 times. You do not know how to drive a bus. You have never considered driving a bus. But the training is paid, which means you would earn while learning, and the union wage scale tops out at $27 after 3 years, and pension after 5, and benefits after 60 days, and the mortgage statement is still on the kitchen table where you left it because neither of you wanted to be the one to put it away. You apply that afternoon. The training is 6 weeks, and by the end of the first week, you understand that a bus is not a large car, it is not a truck, it is a specific machine with a specific logic, and that logic is predominantly about what is behind you. The bus is 40 feet long and 8.5 feet wide, and you are responsible for every inch of it, including the 30-some feet you cannot directly see, which is what the mirrors are for. Both of them, exterior and interior. And the schedule for checking them is continuous and unforgiving. Your trainer is a woman named Bev who has been driving the route for 16 years, and who teaches the way certain people do not by explaining, but by asking. Not what do you think, but what did you miss? And you miss things. At first, the car that's pulled up too close on the right, the cyclist who materialized in the blind spot during a stop, the pedestrian who stepped off the curb 2 seconds before you completed the turn. Bev says nothing inflammatory. She says, look again. She says, where were your eyes? She is not unkind, but she is thorough, and thorough is what this requires. You pass your CDL test and your route certification on the same Tuesday, and the feeling of passing them is not pride, exactly, but a functional relief, a door opening onto the thing you need to get through, and you walk through it. You are assigned to Route 43. It runs from the transit center on 4th Avenue Northwest to the Ridgeline neighborhood and back Monday through Friday, with 2 additional Saturday runs, 5:30 a.m. first departure, and you are on the early pull, which means you are at the yard by 4:45 to do your pre-trip and pull your bus from the lot. The first morning on your own, without Bev in the seat behind you, is its own category of experience. The bus is the same bus. The route is the same route. But the absence of another professional body in the space changes the weight of every decision in a way you weren't fully prepared for. You pull out of the yard at 5:22 in the dark, and you drive to the transit center, and you wait for the 5:30 departure and the first passengers board. And they are the passengers you have come to recognize from the training runs, the night shift workers heading home with their bags, the early commuters with their coffee, the older woman with the rolling cart who boards at 3rd Street every single morning, and they sit down without looking at you or acknowledging that you exist, which is not unfriendly. It's just that you are the driver. And the driver is not a person so much as a function. And you understand this, and you pull away from the stop on schedule, and you drive Route 43. The pay at 1940 works out to about $600 net per week on a 40-hour schedule. Your mortgage payment is $1,240. Your car payment is $3 to $10. You are making it But making it and being okay are not the same thing, and you understand this in the specific way you understand things that are true and inconvenient at the same time. The union contract guarantees a raise to 2160 at the 1 year mark and again at 2 years, and the top rate at 3 years is 2710. And you keep this trajectory somewhere in the back of your mind, the way you'd keep a map, not looking at it constantly, but knowing it's there and that it goes somewhere. The schedule becomes your life faster than you expected. 4:45 a.m. wake happens before the alarm on most days because your body, which has always been more practical than your mind, has already accepted the condition and reorganized itself around it. You are in bed by 9:15 most nights, sometimes 9, which means the evening exists for you in a compressed window between dinner and darkness that contains exactly enough time for a conversation with your wife and occasionally a television show, if it's under 40 minutes. She is on a different schedule. She works at a dental office, 8 to 5, and the overlap in your hours is thin, dinner and the hour after it, which is more than some people have and less than what your life looked like before. You adjust. You are becoming a person who adjusts as a primary skill. The passengers are the weather system of the job. Most are unremarkable in the functional sense. They board, they pay or tap their cards, they sit, they exit, they do not interact with you beyond the minimum required for transit. The ones who say good morning when they board you begin to know by name, or at least by face and greeting the tall man with the briefcase who always sits directly behind the rear door, the pair of high school girls who get on together at Maple, and who always look faintly betrayed by the hour, the older man named Ed who boards at the library, stop on his way to a dialysis appointment every Tuesday and Thursday, and who always says, "Thank you, driver," when he gets off. Always, without exception, with a quality of genuine thanks that costs him nothing and registers with you every time more than it probably should. Because the job does not generate much that feels like gratitude, and you begin to notice its presence the way you notice warmth on a cold day. The difficult passengers are a different taxonomy. There is the man who boards at the community college stop on Tuesdays with a bottle that is not quite empty and whose relationship with the fare is always negotiable, and whose relationship with the seat nearest the door is possessive, whose behavior toward other passengers ranges from tedious to alarming. You have been through the Transit Authority's conflict protocol training, which prepared you in the way that a map prepares you for a mountain adequately for the theory, incompletely for the physical reality. The protocol says, verbal de-escalation, fare non-compliance is not grounds for physical removal. Call dispatch if situation escalates. Document the incident on Form T7. The protocol does not say what to do with your hands or your voice when a man is standing in the aisle 2 feet from you, and the bus is full and you are behind schedule, and the options available to you are limited by the rules you work. Inside, you learn what to do from the doing. You learn a tone of voice that is not aggressive and not supplicant, that is firm in the way walls are firm, not threatening, just present, just there. It works often enough. The times it doesn't work, you call dispatch, and dispatch sends a supervisor, and the supervisor arrives eventually. And in the meantime, you keep the route moving because the route doesn't wait for resolution. Your supervisor at the Transit Authority is a man named Ted Marsh, who manages the early pull drivers from an office at the yard that smells like burnt coffee and old paper. Ted is not malicious. He is bureaucratic in a very specific way, meaning his primary loyalty is to the schedule adherence metrics that his own supervisor reviews. And his primary tool for improving those metrics is the on-time report, which is generated automatically by the system every day and which shows, to 1 decimal point, the percentage of stops you hit within your scheduled window. If you're consistently below 90% on time, Ted calls you in. The call-in is not punitive. Officially, it is a performance conversation, which in transit language means your record is noted, your awareness is confirmed, and the notes of this conversation are filed somewhere that matters if the number doesn't improve. You have been at 93% for your first 4 months, which is above the threshold, which means you have not had a performance conversation and you intend to keep it that way. The problem with 93% is the nature of what the other 7% costs you. The 7% is the days when a freight train holds traffic at the crossing on Birch for 4 minutes, which is 4 minutes you cannot recover at 19 stops per half hour. It is the passenger who needs the wheelchair ramp and whose destination is the stop with the broken ramp indicator, and who boards at the beginning of the route and whose loading takes 3 minutes instead of 90 seconds, because the Ramp mechanism hesitates in cold weather. It is the accident on the connector road that redirects traffic through Chandler Avenue, which adds 6 to 8 minutes depending on signal timing. None of these things are your fault. All of them are recorded against your number. You learn to run tight on the recoverable stretches, leaving stops the moment all passengers are seated rather than 5 seconds after. Routing through the turn at Hamilton that saves 40 seconds if you make the light, rolling through the schedule with a precision that becomes its own kind of craft. You gain back most of the 7%. You stay above 90. The union is the architecture that makes the job endurable, and you come to understand this gradually the way you understand anything structural. Not because someone explains it to you, but because you begin to see what isn't there when it's present and what would be there if it weren't. The union is why Ted cannot simply reassign you to a worse route when your on-time number dips. It is why the overtime policy is transparent and enforceable, why your right to refuse an unsafe vehicle is documented and protected, why the passenger incident you logged in month 3, the man with the bottle, ultimately, who pushed a seated passenger before you could reach dispatch, resulted in a formal report that was processed and reviewed rather than quietly discouraged. You are not someone who has been particularly union-minded historically. You become someone who is, because the union is the only place in the entire system where the power is not entirely arranged against you. By month 6, you know Route 43, the way you know rooms in your own house, not by thinking about them, but by inhabiting them, your body doing the navigation, while your mind is free to occupy itself elsewhere, though elsewhere during the job has limited real estate. You know which stretch of Birch has a pothole that requires a 3-degree right correction at speed. You know that the stop at 4th and Elm has a curb cut with a grade that will catch your front right tire if you pull too close, which will jostle passengers in a way that once earned you a complaint. You know that the afternoon return run between 3:30 and 4:15 is the worst traffic window on the route and cannot be meaningfully improved regardless of how you drive it, and that accepting this fact is more energy efficient than fighting it. You know that the heater on the left side of the bus lags about 4 minutes behind the right side in cold weather, and that passengers who board at the outdoor stops in January and sit on the left side will sometimes say something about it, and you will say you'll let maintenance know, and maintenance will note it, and nothing will happen, and the heater will continue to lag, and you will continue to say you'll let maintenance know. There is a period in month 7 that you will think of later as the bottom of a particular curve. It follows 2 things that happen close together. The transit authority announces a service reduction that eliminates 2 runs from your weekly schedule, which drops your guaranteed hours from 40 to 36 and your paycheck by about $150 a month. And a passenger files a complaint about you, the first formal complaint of your tenure, claiming that you were rude during a fare dispute. The complaint is from a man who boarded without a valid pass and argued about it for 3 minutes and said things to you that you did not respond to because you had the presence of mind not to, but when you calmly told him he would need to pay the fare or exit the bus, he apparently experienced this as rudeness. Ted calls you in. He says it's probably nothing but procedure, requires a conversation. You sit across from him in the office that smells like coffee and paper, and you listen to the complaint read back to you in the administrative language that transforms everything human into event notation, and you say that your account of the interaction is different from the passengers, and Ted says that's noted, and he makes a note, and you go back to your bus. You drive that afternoon's run in a state of interior weather you don't show on your face, which is itself a skill you have developed over 7 months of being looked at by 40 people at a time, or not looked at, which amounts to the same self-management. The complaint will be reviewed and filed and almost certainly go nowhere, because complaints without corroborating witness accounts are categorized as unresolved and archived. But the fact of it, the unreasonableness of it, the specific cost of having kept your composure in a difficult situation and been written up for it anyway, this costs you something. You take it home and put it somewhere you can't find a good place for it, and drive Route 43 the next morning at 5:30, the same as every morning. Your wife asks how things are going a month into the hour reduction, and you say they're going. She says, "Is that good or bad?" You think about it honestly. You say, "It's manageable." She says, "Manageable is different from good." You say, "Yes." She says, "Okay." She puts her hand on the table and you put yours on top of it. And you both sit there for a moment in the particular companionship of 2 people who are navigating something together without talking about it constantly. which is one of the better things about a long marriage, the tolerance for silence that contains understanding without requiring it to be spoken. The hour reduction is restored in month 9 when the Transit Authority revises the service schedule in response to ridership data and your 40 hours come back. You receive this news on a printed bulletin posted in the driver's room at the yard, and you read it once and you move on because somewhere in the 8 months you've been doing this, you've lost the habit of celebrating things that are simply the restoration of what you had. And this seems like a reasonable adjustment to the reality of the job. There is a driver named Marcus who you begin to know at month 5, when he starts taking the pull before yours and your pre-trip windows overlap. Marcus is in his 15th year and he drives Route 12, and he has the quality of someone who has found a precise equilibrium with the work, not passionate about it, not resentful of it, just competently inside it, the way a key is inside a lock that fits. He tells you things that are useful and doesn't editorialize. He says the first year is when you find out what kind of driver you're going to be. Not in skill, but in disposition, whether the job is going to get under your skin or whether you're going to get above it. You ask which he is. He says he decided about year 3 that the passengers are just passengers, meaning they're not a reflection of anything, they're not a judgment, they're just people who need to be somewhere, and that this framing removes a category of suffering from the job that is otherwise available 24 hours a day. You consider this for several days. You find it useful and partially applicable, and, in the cases where it doesn't apply, a good reason to stay quiet. The winter run is hard in a specific way. The cold is not the problem. The bus has heat, your coat is adequate, but what the cold does to the schedule is a problem, because cold weather slows everything. Boarding times increase as passengers fumble with bags and cards and gloves. Road conditions reduce safe speed on 2 sections of the route, and the wheelchair ramp mechanism that hesitates in cold weather now hesitates more often and longer. Your on-time rate drops to 89% in January. Ted does not call you in because he has the same numbers from 12 other drivers and he understands, or at least he understands the data's explanation for itself, which is close enough to understanding. You spend January doing the math every morning on the route, trying to recover time from the places where time can be recovered, accepting the places where it cannot, keeping the number above the threshold the way you've learned to keep all your numbers steadily, with very little celebration and no waste. In the second year, your wage increases to $21.60 as scheduled, and the $140 per month this adds is not insignificant, is in fact the difference between the mortgage being uncomfortable and the mortgage being paid with a thin margin of tolerance. You note this with the satisfaction of someone watching a plan execute correctly, not joy, which requires surplus, but the solid, functional satisfaction of a thing working the way it was supposed to work. You become, in the second year, a driver that people notice in the specific way that reliable things get noticed, which is mostly by their absence when they're gone. The dialysis man Ed mentions once at the end of a Tuesday run that there was a substitute driver on Thursday and that it took him an extra 20 minutes to get home. He says this without complaint, just as information, the way people share information about things that affect them, and you say you're sorry to hear that, you'll be on Thursday next week. He says he knows. He says thanks, driver. He gets off the bus. You close the door and pull away from the stop and drive the last 4 stops to the turnaround, and you sit there in the 2-minute layover window, which is your window, which belongs to no one else, and you breathe. There is a night in the second year when you cannot sleep, which is unusual because sleep is not something you resist anymore. Sleep is an animal need that arrives and you answer it. But this night you are awake at 2 a.m., lying in the dark with your wife breathing beside you, and you are thinking about something you can't name precisely, some accumulation of months, the complaint and the hour reduction and the cold January and the 7% and Ed on Tuesdays and the man with the bottle and the cooking show still going in the other room of a different night when all of this started. You are not unhappy, not in the way you might have predicted you'd be, doing this job at this age. You are something more complicated than unhappy. You are inside a life that was built from necessity and that has become, through repetition and time and the small negotiations of survival, genuinely yours, not the life you would have designed, not the life the cooking show suggested was available, but a life that has real things in it, that pays for real things, that requires you to show up and show up and show up, which you have done, which you are doing, which you will do tomorrow at 4:45. You get up and drink a glass of water in the kitchen and go back to bed and you sleep. The third year brings the next raise, to 2430 and a route reassignment that you did not request but receive as a consequence of the new seniority rotation, moving you from Route 43 to Route 18, which is longer, has more stops, runs through a denser part of the city, and carries higher ridership. You sit with the assignment notice in the driver's room for a moment, and you think about Ed, who will now get a different driver on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which you cannot control and which bothers you more than it should for about 3 days. And then you learn Route 18 stop by stop, the way you learn anything now through the doing, through the repetition, through the slow accumulation of specific knowledge about the places where the curb cut catches your tire, and the stretch where the schedule can be recovered, and the window of the light at Hamilton that saves or costs you 40 seconds, depending on your timing. You learn it, you own it, you drive it. You are 2 months from the top of the pay scale now, from 2710, which is the number that was always at the end of the map, and you run toward it not with anticipation exactly, but with the competence of someone who has learned to navigate by holding the destination lightly in mind while attending very carefully to what is directly in front of them. The pension vests in 2 years. You think about this the way you think about everything in this job practically specifically, as a number that matters and a reason to continue. Your wife asks you once, in the 3rd year, maybe a month into Route 18, whether you're happy. Not whether you're okay, not whether things are manageable, happy. You look at her and you think about it with real attention, the same attention you give to the mirrors, the same attention you give to the schedule, because she deserves the real answer and not the first available one. You say you're not unhappy. She says that's not the same thing. You say you know. You say you're something else, something there isn't exactly a word for, something that is competence and endurance and the particular satisfaction of a person who has learned to do a hard thing well and who does it every day and who the job has changed, genuinely changed, into someone more patient and more practical and more willing to absorb difficulty without performance than the person who sat at the kitchen table with the folder 3 years ago. You say it's complicated. She says she knows. She says she can see you've gotten good at it. You say yeah. She says that counts for something. You say it does. The bus is at the stop. The doors are open. The morning people file on the briefcase man, the high school girls who still look faintly betrayed by the hour even though the hour has not changed, a new cohort of night shift workers and early commuters, and a man at the 3rd stop who boards with a wheeled suitcase and a look of someone who needs to be somewhere specific and is not entirely sure he's on the right bus. He looks at you and says, hesitantly, "Does this go to the transit center?" You say, "Yes, sir." He relaxes visibly, the way people relax when the thing they feared was wrong turns out to be right, and he sits down and puts his suitcase between his feet and looks out the window. You close the doors. You check your mirrors, left, right, interior, the whole sweep, the 30 feet behind you, and the 8 feet on either side, everything you cannot see directly but have learned to see anyway. You pull away from the stop. The route is in front of you, 43 stops and back, the same as it has always been, the same as it will be, and you drive it.